The rhythmic, comforting hum of the vintage Singer sewing machine filled the small, sunlit front room of the house in Atlanta. For 35 years, that sound had been the heartbeat of this home. Emma sat hunched over the heavy wooden table, her foot working the pedal with the practiced grace of a woman who had sewn her way through grief, through poverty, and through the long, lonely years of raising a son by herself. She was 62 years old now. Her hands, once smooth and swift, were mapped with the raised, branching rivers of veins and the slight, permanent swell of arthritis at the knuckles. Yet they moved with an expert's precision, guiding a delicate panel of ivory lace under the rapid needle. She was altering a wedding dress for a neighborhood girl, pinching the fabric, pinning it, making it perfect. Making things perfect for other people had been the story of Emma's life. As she worked, the late November afternoon sun slanted through the blinds, casting golden, dusty stripes across the worn hardwood floor. The house was quiet. It was the kind of deep, heavy quiet that only settles into a house when the people who used to fill it have grown up and moved away. The empty nest, the ladies at church called it. Emma used to smile and nod when they talked about it, pretending she enjoyed the peace. But the truth, the quiet truth she kept locked behind her ribs, was that the silence was sometimes so loud it made her ears ring. She paused, lifting her foot from the pedal, and rubbed her lower back. She looked up at the mantelpiece above the small fireplace. It was her own personal museum, a shrine to the two men who had defined her existence. On the left was a faded, silver-framed photograph of her late husband, Thomas. He had passed away from a sudden heart attack when their son was just 10 years old. Thomas had been a good man, a hard-working mechanic who smelled of motor oil and peppermint, but he hadn't left much behind besides a modest life insurance policy and a gaping hole in Emma's world. On the right side of the mantel, dominating the space, were the pictures of Marcus. Marcus in his middle school basketball uniform, Marcus proudly holding his high school diploma, Marcus standing in front of his university library, wearing the crisp suit Emma had bought him by taking on 3 extra alteration jobs that month. And finally, the most recent photo. Marcus in Los Angeles, looking sharp, polished, and successful, standing with his arm wrapped around his wife, Chloe. Marcus was 35 now, the chief financial officer of a mid-sized tech firm on the West Coast. He was her triumph. Every pricked finger, every late night spent squinting under the harsh bulb of the sewing machine, every skipped meal, and every frayed winter coat she had worn for a decade so he could have new sneakers, it had all been worth it. She had built a launch pad out of her own sacrifices, and her son had flown to the stars. "My son, the CFO," she would say to the cashier at the grocery store, to the mailman, to anyone who would listen. Her chest would swell with a pride so fierce it almost hurt. It was Tuesday, just 2 days before Thanksgiving. The air outside in Atlanta carried that crisp, biting chill that smelled of wood smoke and dried pine needles. Emma stood up from her sewing table, brushing a few stray threads from her dark slacks. It was time to start cooking. Thanksgiving was sacred to Emma. It wasn't just a holiday, it was the anchor of the year, the time when the fragmented pieces of the family were supposed to snap back together. And this year, Marcus had promised to come home. He hadn't been back to Atlanta for Thanksgiving in 3 years. The first year, he and Chloe had gone to Paris for a baby moon before they were even pregnant. The second year, they were busy moving into their new, expansive house in the Hollywood Hills. But this year, Marcus had said over the phone a month ago, "I'll be there, Mom. Just me and you, like old times. Chloe wants to spend it with her parents, but I'm coming home to get some of that famous peach cobbler." The thought of him sitting at the small oak dining table had fueled Emma for weeks. She had gone to the farmer's market 3 times to make sure she got the best, sweetest late-season peaches. She had spent a small fortune on a free-range turkey. The refrigerator was currently packed to the brim with Tupperware containers of prepped ingredients, the chopped celery and onions for her signature cornbread dressing, the washed and torn collard greens soaking in the pot with the smoked turkey neck, the homemade cranberry sauce that took 2 hours to reduce, and the sweet potato pies cooling on the counter. Emma walked into the kitchen, tying her faded floral apron around her waist. She hummed an old gospel tune, her voice a soft, rich alto that vibrated in the small room. She pulled out the large ceramic bowl she had inherited from her own mother and began to sift the flour for the cobbler crust. Baking was a love language. For a woman of her generation, a black woman who had been taught that actions spoke louder than any words, Putting a hot, soul-nourishing meal in front of her child was the ultimate expression of devotion. She poured the ice water into the flour, cutting in the butter until it resembled coarse meal, her hands moving entirely from muscle memory. He's going to be so tired from the flight, she thought, smiling to herself. I'll make sure his old room has the heavy quilt on the bed. Los Angeles makes people's blood thin. He'll be freezing. The kitchen soon filled with the intoxicating, warm scent of cinnamon, nutmeg, and baking butter. Emma felt a deep, profound sense of purpose. For the first time in months, she didn't feel invisible. She felt like a mother again. By Wednesday afternoon, the house was immaculate. The floors were polished. The guest room, which was still meticulously decorated with Marcus's childhood trophies, was dusted, and the kitchen was a symphony of simmering pots. Emma had just put the cobbler into the oven when the shrill ring of her cell phone cut through the quiet. She wiped her floured hands on her apron and reached for the phone on the counter. The caller ID flashed. Marcus. A warm, eager smile spread across her face. He was probably calling from the airport in Los Angeles. Maybe he wanted her to pick him up at Hartsfield-Jackson instead of taking a taxi. "Hey there, my handsome boy," Emma answered, her voice lifting with genuine joy. "Are you at the gate yet? Atlanta is a bit chilly today. I hope you packed that thick wool coat I bought you last Christmas." There was a pause on the other end of the line, a slight static-filled hesitation that made the smile on Emma's face falter just a fraction. "Hey, Mom," Marcus said. His voice was rushed, clipped, and lacked the warmth she had been expecting. He sounded like a man reading from a script he didn't particularly like. "Look, Mom, I have some bad news." Emma's heart did a strange, uncomfortable flutter. She leaned against the kitchen counter, her grip tightening on the phone. "Bad news? What is it, sweetheart? Was your flight delayed? That's fine, baby. I can keep the food warm. It doesn't matter what time you get in." "No, Mom, it's not the flight," Marcus sighed. It was a heavy, exasperated sigh, the kind of sound someone makes when they are inconvenienced by the conversation they are having. "I'm not coming. I can't make it to Atlanta." The silence in Emma's kitchen suddenly felt suffocating. The ticking of the wall clock seemed to amplify, echoing in her ears. She stared blankly at the glass door of the oven, watching the peach juices bubble up through the golden lattice crust of the cobbler. You're not coming?" she repeated, her voice dropping to a whisper. She fought to keep the tremor out of it. "I can't, Mom. Work is absolute insanity right now," Marcus said, speaking quickly, trying to bulldoze through the excuse before she could question it. "We're closing the fourth quarter, and this new merger is taking all my time. The CEO basically demanded I stay in town. I'm going to be stuck at the office all day tomorrow looking at spreadsheets. It's a disaster, but you know how it is. My hands are tied." Emma closed her eyes. The ache in her chest was sharp and familiar. It was the same ache she felt when he forgot her birthday last year, only calling 2 days later with a hurried apology. It was the same ache she felt when she realized he hadn't asked her how she was doing in over 6 months. "But Marcus," she managed to say, her maternal instinct trying to soothe him, "it's Thanksgiving. They can't make you work on Thanksgiving. You've been working so hard, baby. You need to rest. You need a home-cooked meal." "Mom, please don't guilt-trip me right now," he snapped. The irritation in his voice was like a physical slap. "I'm already stressed enough as it is. I'm a CFO, not a junior accountant. I have responsibilities. I thought you, of all people, would understand that. You're the one who pushed me to be successful, right?" The unfairness of the statement choked her, but Emma swallowed it down. She had been trained by a lifetime of hardship to absorb the pain of the people she loved, to be the emotional shock absorber for her family. If her son needed her to be understanding, she would be understanding. She would not add to his burden. "I know, sweetheart," Emma said softly, forcing her voice to sound bright and supportive. "I know how important your job is. I'm just going to miss you, that's all. I made your favorite cobbler." "I'll make it up to you, Mom. I promise," Marcus said, the relief in his voice palpable now that he had avoided a confrontation. "We'll do something big for Christmas, okay? I have to jump on a conference call now. Love you. Eat an extra slice of pie for me." "I love you too, Marcus. Be safe," she whispered. But the line had already clicked dead. Emma stood in the kitchen for a long time, the phone still pressed to her ear, listening to the dial tone. Slowly, she lowered her arm. She looked around at the feast she had prepared, the massive turkey thawing in the fridge, the pots of greens and dressing, the beautiful, bubbling cobbler that she had spent hours perfecting. It was enough food to feed a dozen people, and she was the only one in the house. She walked over to the stove, turned off the oven, and sat down at the small kitchen table. She didn't cry. Crying felt like a luxury she couldn't afford right now. Instead, a deep, hollow numbness washed over her. She told herself what she always told herself. He is a good boy. He is just busy. He is building a life. This is what you raised him for. You raised him to be independent. But logic does very little to warm a cold, empty house. Thursday arrived, gray and overcast. Thanksgiving Day. For the first time in her life, Emma didn't put on her Sunday best. She stayed in her old, comfortable sweatpants and a worn-out cardigan. She heated up a small plate of leftovers from Tuesday, a piece of baked chicken and some rice. She couldn't bring herself to touch the Thanksgiving food. It felt like a monument to a broken promise, sitting in the refrigerator like a silent mockery of her hope. She ate her simple dinner in the living room, sitting in her armchair with the television on low volume just to have some background noise. The parade marched across the screen, full of brightly colored floats and cheering crowds, but Emma looked right through it. By 8 o'clock in the evening, the house was entirely dark except for the blue glow of the television and the small lamp beside her chair. Emma reached for her iPad on the side table. It was a gift from Marcus a few years ago, mostly so they could FaceTime, though those calls had dwindled to almost nothing since he married Chloe. She opened the device and tapped on the blue icon for Facebook. She didn't post much, but she liked seeing pictures of the girls from her church, the babies being born, the graduation photos. It was her window into a community she often felt too tired to visit in person these days. As she scrolled through the feed, liking a picture of her neighbor's new puppy, the screen refreshed. A new post appeared at the top of her timeline. It was from Eleanor Jenkins, Chloe's mother. Eleanor was a wealthy, pretentious woman who lived in a gated community in Calabasas. She loved to document her perfect, affluent life on social media, curating an image of upper-class bliss. The caption read, "So incredibly blessed this Thanksgiving. Nothing fills my heart with more joy than having my beautiful daughter, my wonderful son-in-law, and our entire extended family gathered around my table. We have so much to be thankful for. #FamilyFirst, #Thanksgiving, at the Jenkins #blessed. Emma's breath caught in her throat. Her thumb hovered over the screen, paralyzed. Below the caption was a carousel of high-resolution, professionally lit photographs. Emma tapped on the first image to enlarge it. It was a picture of a massive, opulent dining room. A long mahogany table was set with fine china, crystal wine glasses, and a centerpiece of cascading autumn flowers. Seated around the table were at least 15 people, all laughing, all dressed to the nines. And right there, sitting at the head of the table next to Eleanor, was Marcus. He was not in an office. He was not looking at spreadsheets. He was not wearing a tired, stressed expression. He was wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, a crisp white shirt unbuttoned at the collar. He had a glass of red wine in one hand, and his other arm was draped affectionately around Chloe's shoulders. His head was thrown back in a booming, genuine laugh, looking at something his father-in-law had just said. He looked relaxed. He looked happy. He looked like a man who was exactly where he wanted to be. Emma swiped to the next photo. It was a close-up of Marcus and Chloe, clinking their glasses together. Swipe. A picture of Marcus helping Eleanor carve a massive golden-brown turkey, smiling for the camera. The iPad felt heavy in Emma's hands, as if it had suddenly turned to lead. Her chest tightened, a sharp, suffocating pressure clamping down on her lungs. The air in the room seemed to vanish. "I'm going to be stuck at the office all day tomorrow looking at spreadsheets. It's a disaster, but you know how it is. My hands are tied." His words from the day before echoed in her mind, loud and clear, mocking her. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It wasn't a sudden change of plans. It was a calculated, deliberate lie. He had looked her in the eyes, or at least he had spoken into her ear with the confidence of someone looking her in the eyes, and he had lied to her face. He hadn't canceled because he was working. He had canceled because he preferred to be with his wife's family. He had chosen the glamorous, wealthy in-laws in Los Angeles over his aging, working-class mother in Atlanta. And worse, he hadn't even had the courage or the respect to tell her the truth. He had taken the coward's way out, leaving her to bake pies and make up a guest bed that he never had any intention of sleeping in. A cold, creeping numbness started at Emma's fingertips and moved slowly up her arms. It wasn't just disappointment anymore. Disappointment was a familiar friend. This was something else entirely. This was betrayal. It was a sharp, jagged knife twisting in the very center of her heart. She stared at the digital face of her son on the screen. The son she had wiped feverish sweat from. The son she had gone hungry for. The son she had traded her youth, her knees, and her eyesight to protect and elevate. He is ashamed of me. The thought struck her with the force of a physical blow. The realization was so bright and blinding it made her dizzy. He didn't want to bring Chloe to this old house with the squeaky floorboards. He didn't want to eat soul food at a cramped kitchen table. He wanted crystal glasses and catered meals. He has outgrown me. For the first time since her husband died 32 years ago, Emma broke down. The tears didn't come softly. They came in violent, racking sobs that shook her entire body. She dropped the iPad onto the armchair beside her and buried her face in her rough, scarred hands. She wept for the cobbler sitting cold in the kitchen. She wept for the empty guest room. She wept for the woman who had given away every ounce of her own life force to build a man who now found her inconvenient. The silence of the house, which had only been an annoyance before, now felt like a tomb. It was the silence of irrelevance. She cried until her throat was raw and her eyes were swollen nearly shut. She cried until there was absolutely nothing left inside her but a dry, hollow ache. When the tears finally stopped, the digital clock on the cable box read 11:45 p.m. Thanksgiving was almost over. Emma slowly lifted her head. She wiped her face with the back of her sleeve. Her breathing was ragged, but her mind surprisingly began to clear. The agonizing pain of the betrayal began to cool, hardening into something else, something heavy and solid. She picked up the iPad again. The picture of Marcus laughing at the luxurious table was still on the screen. She didn't cry this time. She just looked at him, really looked at the man he had become. She saw the expensive watch on his wrist. She saw the way he leaned toward Chloe's family, eager to please, eager to belong to a world of privilege he had not been born into. She saw a man who had traded his roots for a seat at a richer table. Emma closed the Facebook app. She turned off the iPad and set it gently on the table. She stood up. Her joints ached, her back was stiff, but she stood up straight. She walked into the kitchen, turned on the harsh overhead fluorescent light, and looked at the feast she had prepared. She didn't throw it away. Throwing it away would be letting his disrespect destroy her hard work. Instead, she methodically began to pack the food into large aluminum trays. The turkey, the dressing, the greens, the pies. She wrapped everything tightly in foil. Tomorrow morning she would take it all down to the community center at her church. Pastor Williams always needed extra food for the shelter on the day after Thanksgiving. The food would feed people who actually wanted it, people who were genuinely grateful. As she wiped down the countertops, a quiet, profound shift occurred deep within Emma's soul. The unconditional, blind, sacrificial love she had carried for 35 years had cracked. The pedestal she had placed her son upon had shattered into 1,000 irreparable pieces. She still loved him. She was a mother. She would always love him. But the nature of that love had irrevocably changed. She was no longer going to be the martyr. She was no longer going to be the emotional dumping ground or the backup plan. If her son wanted to live a life built on lies and convenience, he would have to do it without her standing in the wings, waiting to applaud. Emma untied her apron, draped it over the back of the chair, and turned off the kitchen light. The house was still quiet. But as she walked down the hallway to her bedroom, the silence didn't feel lonely anymore. It felt like space. Space she finally had all to herself. Space to breathe. Space to figure out who Emma was, now that she was no longer just Marcus's mother. The first boundary had been silently drawn in the dark, empty house in Atlanta. And though Marcus, laughing 3,000 miles away with a glass of wine in his hand, had no idea, the foundation of their relationship had just permanently fractured. The era of the selfless, invisible mother was over. The winter thawed into a humid, blossom-heavy Atlanta spring, but the chill between Emma and her son remained. They spoke, of course, but the conversations were brief, hollow things, reduced to weather updates and polite inquiries. Emma never mentioned the Thanksgiving photos. Marcus never offered an explanation for his absence. They danced around the truth like strangers sharing an elevator, both relieved when the doors finally opened and they could go their separate ways. Yet Emma's hands could not remain idle. Even as she practiced her newfound emotional distance, her fingers moved rhythmically every evening, the click-clack of her knitting needles breaking the silence of the living room. She was knitting a baby blanket, soft sage green and buttercup yellow, woven from the finest, most expensive cotton yarn she could find at the specialty craft store downtown. Chloe was due in late April. Emma had poured every ounce of her complicated, aching love into the stitches. She told herself that a child is innocent. A grandson carries the blood of her late husband, Thomas. No matter what Marcus had done, no matter how cold Chloe was, Emma was determined to be a grandmother. When the call came, it wasn't a call at all. It was a Tuesday morning. Emma was at her sewing table, pinning a hem, when her iPad chimed with a notification. It was an Instagram tag. She wiped her hands, put on her reading glasses, and tapped the screen. Her heart dropped into her stomach, a heavy, familiar stone. It was a photo from a hospital room. Chloe was sitting up in a pristine white bed, her hair perfectly styled despite having just given birth, cradling a tiny, red-faced bundle in her arms. Marcus stood on one side, leaning in to kiss his wife's temple. On the other side stood Eleanor, Chloe's mother, beaming triumphantly at the camera. The caption read, "Welcome to the world, Leo Thomas Carter. 7 pounds, 2 ounces of absolute perfection. I couldn't have survived this 14-hour labor without my rock, my amazing mother, holding my hand through every contraction. 3 generations of love." There was no text message from Marcus, no missed call. Her grandson had been brought into the world, and once again, Emma was relegated to the role of a spectator in the digital bleachers, finding out at the exact same time as Chloe's nail technician and Marcus's college frat brothers. Emma took off her glasses. She pressed her thumb to the bridge of her nose, squeezing her eyes shut. She did not cry. The tears had been spent back in November. Now there was only a cold, quiet resolve. She picked up her phone and dialed Marcus's number. It went straight to voicemail. "Marcus," she said, her voice steady and calm. "I saw the news on the internet. Congratulations on my beautiful grandson. I will be booking a flight to Los Angeles for this weekend to meet him. Call me back." She hung up. She didn't ask for permission. She didn't wait for an invitation that she knew would never come. She went to her computer, logged into her meager savings account, and purchased a round-trip ticket to LAX. The price made her wince. It was money she had set aside to fix the leaky roof. But she pushed the thought away. She was going to see her grandson. When Emma's Uber pulled up to the sprawling, ultra-modern house in the Hollywood Hills 4 days later, the stark contrast between her world and her son's world had never felt sharper. The house was a fortress of glass, steel, and stark white concrete, perched precariously on a cliffside. It looked like a museum, not a home. Emma paid the driver, hoisted her carefully packed floral suitcase, and walked up the pristine driveway. She held a gift bag containing the sage and yellow blanket, along with 3 vintage children's books she had saved from Marcus's own childhood. Marcus opened the door before she could even ring the bell. He looked terrible. The polished, arrogant CFO from the Thanksgiving photos was gone, replaced by a man with dark, bruised bags under his eyes, wearing a wrinkled t-shirt and smelling faintly of sour milk and stale coffee. "Mom," he said, running a hand over his face. He didn't step forward to hug her. He just stood in the doorway, shifting his weight. "You're here." "I told you I was coming, Marcus," Emma said mildly, stepping past him into the cavernous foyer. The air conditioning was turned up so high it raised goosebumps on her arms. "Where is he? Where is my grandson?" He's in the nursery with Chloe," Marcus stammered, closing the door. "Look, Mom, things are a little chaotic right now. Chloe is really exhausted and her hormones are all over the place. Just tread lightly, okay?" Emma gave him a long, unreadable look. "I have raised a child, Marcus. I know what postpartum looks like. Take me to my grandson." Marcus led her down a wide, sun-drenched hallway. They entered the living room, a sprawling space filled with sharp-edged designer furniture that looked incredibly uncomfortable. And there, sitting on a velvet armchair with a cup of tea, was Eleanor. "Oh, Emma," Eleanor sang out, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. She was wearing a silk kimono and had her hair professionally blown out. "We weren't expecting you so early. The traffic from LAX is usually a nightmare." "We," as if Eleanor owned the house. "Hello, Eleanor," Emma said politely, her posture stiffening. "I took the red-eye." Just then, Chloe emerged from a room down the hall. She was wearing expensive matching loungewear, cradling the tiny wrapped bundle against her chest. Emma's breath hitched. All the resentment, all the anger, vanished in a single heartbeat. There he was, Leo. He had a shock of thick, dark, curly hair and a tiny, perfect button nose. He was a piece of Marcus, a piece of Thomas, a piece of her. Emma dropped her suitcase and took a step forward, her arms automatically lifting, her hands trembling with anticipation. "Oh, my lord, he is beautiful. Chloe, he is absolutely beautiful. Let Grandma see him." Emma reached out to take the baby. Instantly, Chloe took a sharp half-step backward, her shoulder turning away to shield the child. The physical rejection was so swift, so visceral, that Emma froze, her empty arms suspended in the air. "Oh, Emma, hi," Chloe said, her voice tight and forced. "Thank you. But he just fell asleep. If we pass him around, it's going to overstimulate him, and it took me an hour to get him down. The pediatrician says we need to be very strict with his routine." Emma stood there, her hands suspended over nothing. She looked at Marcus, silently begging him to intervene, to say, "Chloe, let my mother hold my son." Marcus looked at the floor. "Yeah, Mom, he's a really light sleeper. Maybe later." Emma slowly lowered her arms. The rejection burned, a hot, humiliating flush creeping up her neck. "I see," she said quietly. She picked up her gift bag and held it out. "Well, I brought this for him. I knitted it myself. And some of Marcus's old books." Chloe glanced at the bag without taking it. "That's so sweet. Marcus, can you put that in the garage with the overflow gifts? We're trying to keep the nursery strictly minimalist and hypoallergenic. Hand-knit wool can carry so many dust mites." "It's cotton," Emma said, her voice dropping a fraction of an octave. "Organic cotton. Still, better safe than sorry," Chloe smiled tightly. "Anyway, I need to get back to the nursery. Mom, can you make sure my lactation smoothie is ready?" "Of course, darling," Eleanor cooed, brushing past Emma as if she were a piece of furniture. Marcus picked up Emma's suitcase. "Come on, Mom. I'll show you where you're sleeping." He didn't lead her down the hallway toward the bedrooms. Instead, he led her back to the sprawling, cold living room and gestured vaguely toward the massive, L-shaped white leather sectional sofa. Emma stared at it. Then she looked at her son. "The sofa, Marcus? I am 62 years old. I just flew across the country." Marcus had the decency to look ashamed, avoiding her eyes. "I'm sorry, Mom. The guest room... Well, Eleanor is staying in the guest suite. She's been here for 2 weeks helping Chloe prep for the baby, and she needs her own space to decompress. We didn't have anywhere else to put you. It's a really comfortable couch, I promise. It's Italian leather." Emma felt a bitter laugh bubble up in her throat, though she choked it back. The guest room. 5 years ago, when Marcus and Chloe were buying this house, Marcus had called her in a panic. They were short on the closing costs. Emma had cashed out a $5,000 bond Thomas had left her, money meant for her retirement, and wired it to them. Marcus had promised her, "This means you'll always have a place here, Mom. The guest room is yours." And now she was being relegated to the living room couch so the mother-in-law who hadn't contributed a dime to the house could decompress. "The couch is fine," Emma said flatly. She sat down on the edge of it. The leather was freezing. "Go back to your wife, Marcus." Over the next 48 hours, the true nature of Emma's visit revealed itself. She was not there as a grandmother. She had not been invited to bond with Leo. She had been tolerated because they needed unpaid labor. The house was chaotic, despite its minimalist design. Eleanor spent her days taking photos of the baby for her Instagram, offering unsolicited advice, and complaining about the tightness in her shoulders. Chloe spent her time sequestered in the nursery, treating the baby like an exclusive accessory that only she and her mother were qualified to handle. And Emma? Emma was turned into the hired help. "Emma, do you mind throwing a load of towels in the wash?" Chloe asked on the second morning, walking past the kitchen where Emma was drinking a lukewarm cup of coffee. Leo spit up on 3 of them. "Emma, could you run the dishwasher? The bottles need to be sterilized," Eleanor commanded from the dining table, painting her fingernails. "Mom, can you make a run to Whole Foods? Chloe only eats the organic quinoa from the hot bar right now," Marcus asked, tossing her his car keys as he bolted out the door for a quick meeting at the office. Emma did it all. She washed the towels. She scrubbed the bottles until her arthritic knuckles screamed in pain. She cooked meals that Chloe picked at and Eleanor criticized for having too much sodium. She swept the pristine hardwood floors. She bit her tongue so hard she tasted blood. She did it because she kept waiting for her reward. She kept waiting for the moment when the chores were done. The house was quiet, and they would finally hand her the baby. But the moment never came. Whenever Emma approached the nursery, the door was firmly shut. Whenever Chloe brought Leo into the living room, he was strapped into an expensive vibrating bassinet that Emma was explicitly told not to touch. "He's on a schedule," Chloe would say sharply if Emma even leaned over to look at his sleeping face. On the afternoon of her third day in Los Angeles, Emma reached her breaking point. She had just spent 2 hours deep cleaning the kitchen after cooking a massive lunch for the family. Her back was a column of fire, and her feet throbbed. She walked into the living room, wiping her hands on a dish towel. Chloe was sitting on the sofa, Emma's bed, holding Leo. The baby was awake, his large dark eyes wide and curious, staring up at the ceiling. He wasn't crying. He wasn't feeding. He was just awake. Emma's heart leaped. She stepped forward, an exhausted, hopeful smile breaking across her face. "He's awake," she whispered. "Come here to Grandma, little man. Let Grandma hold you." She reached out, her hands open, yearning to feel the weight of her grandson against her chest. Chloe's jaw tightened. With a swift, defensive motion, she stood up, turning her back to Emma and clutching the baby tightly. "Actually, Emma, no. He's in a quiet alert phase. If you hold him, he'll get confused by your scent. He only knows my scent and my mom's scent right now. We don't want to disrupt his attachment style." Emma froze. Her hands dropped to her sides. The words hit her like physical blows. "He only knows my mom's scent. We don't want to disrupt his attachment." She looked at Chloe's stiff back. She looked at Eleanor, who was sitting in the armchair, watching the scene with a faint, superior smirk on her lips. And then she looked at Marcus, who was standing by the window, scrolling through emails on his phone, pretending he hadn't heard a single word. "My scent," Emma repeated, her voice a dangerous, quiet whisper. "I am his grandmother." "And I am his mother," Chloe snapped back, finally turning around. Her eyes were cold, devoid of any empathy. "I make the rules for my child, and right now, I need you to go to the laundry room and switch the baby clothes to the dryer before they wrinkle." The silence in the room was absolute. Even Eleanor stopped smirking, sensing the sudden atmospheric shift in the air. Emma looked at the woman who had married her son. Then she slowly turned her gaze to Marcus. She waited. She gave him one final chance to be a man, to be a son, to stand up and say, "Chloe, that is enough. This is my mother." Marcus looked up from his phone, sensing the tension. He looked at Chloe, then at Emma. He let out a long, cowardly sigh. "Mom, please," Marcus said, his voice laced with annoyance. "Just do what she asks. Don't make a scene. We're all tired." Something inside Emma, the final, frayed thread of her martyrdom, snapped. It didn't break with a loud, dramatic noise. It broke quietly, with the finality of a heavy door clicking shut and locking from the inside. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. Emma slowly untied the dish towel from her waist. She folded it meticulously into a perfect square and placed it on the glass coffee table. She stood up straight, ignoring the pain in her spine, pulling her shoulders back until she looked every inch the proud, resilient woman she had always been. "I am not making a scene, Marcus," Emma said, her voice carrying a chilling, regal calm that made him step back. "I am making an exit." Emma didn't pack with the frantic, messy energy of a woman throwing a tantrum. She packed with the methodical, chilling precision of a woman who had just woken up from a 35-year-long coma. She walked over to the white leather sectional, folded the thin blanket they had given her, and placed it neatly on the cushion. She opened her floral suitcase, placing her toiletries, her clothes, and her pride inside. Finally, she picked up the gift bag containing the sage and yellow baby blanket and the vintage books. She looked at it for a moment, tracing her thumb over the soft yarn. Then she zipped it inside her luggage. Leo would not wear the blanket. Chloe would have thrown it away the moment Emma's Uber pulled out of the driveway, and Emma refused to let her love end up in a Los Angeles landfill. When she walked back into the foyer, rolling her suitcase behind her, Marcus was standing by the front door, looking pale and thoroughly inconvenienced. "Mom, come on, you're overreacting," Marcus pleaded, though his voice lacked any real conviction. He checked his expensive watch. "You've only been here 3 days. Your flight isn't until Sunday." "I have changed my flight," Emma said evenly. She pulled up the ride-sharing app on her phone. "My car is 3 minutes away." "Mom, stop it!" "Chloe is just stressed. The baby is barely sleeping. You know how hard it is to be a new parent." Marcus tried again, reaching out to grab the handle of her suitcase. Emma swatted his hand away with a speed and ferocity that made him flinch. "Do not touch my things, Marcus," she warned, her voice dropping into a register he had never heard before. It wasn't the voice of a nurturing mother. It was the voice of a matriarch who had been crossed for the last time. "And do not dare explain to me how hard it is to be a parent. I raised you in a 2-bedroom house that leaked when it rained. I worked 2 jobs so you could wear brand-name sneakers and pretend we weren't poor. I did it alone, without a husband, without an Eleanor to fan me and fetch my smoothies. I know exactly what it takes." Marcus swallowed hard, his eyes darting toward the hallway, terrified Chloe would hear. "Mom, please. I came here to hold my grandson," Emma continued, her eyes locking onto his, stripping away all his corporate bravado. "Instead, I was treated like the hired help by a woman who looks right through me, while my own son stood by and let her do it. You have made your choices, Marcus. You chose this life. You chose them. But you will no longer have the luxury of using me as your emotional footstool when it's convenient for you." A sleek black car pulled into the driveway, honking softly. Emma gripped the handle of her suitcase. "Goodbye, Marcus. Take care of your son." She walked out into the blinding California sun, leaving the heavy glass door to click shut behind her. As the car rolled down the Hollywood Hills, Emma looked out the window. She didn't shed a single tear. The wound in her chest had been cauterized by the sheer heat of her own self-respect. Returning to Atlanta was like taking a deep, cleansing breath after being held underwater. The house was exactly as she had left it, quiet, unassuming, and completely hers. But Emma was no longer the same woman who had baked the ill-fated Thanksgiving cobbler 6 months prior. The first thing she did was walk into the living room and dismantle the shrine. She took down the framed photos of Marcus's high school graduation, his college degree, the picture of him and Chloe. She didn't throw them away. She wasn't a vindictive woman, but she packed them carefully into a cardboard box and pushed it to the darkest corner of the attic. The mantel was now clear, save for the picture of her late husband, Thomas, and a beautiful new vase she bought for herself, filled with fresh, bright sunflowers. Next, she tackled the guest room, the room that was supposedly waiting for Marcus. She packed up his old basketball trophies and his childhood posters. She moved her sewing machine out of the cramped front room and into the spacious bedroom, setting it up by the large window overlooking the oak trees. It was no longer a shrine to a son who didn't want to visit. It was her studio. She stopped waiting by the phone. When Marcus called, which was rare, usually a brief, guilty 5-minute check-in once a month, she was polite, cordial, but utterly detached. She treated him like a distant nephew. Emma threw herself into her community. She joined the Silver Bells, a travel and social club for retired black women at her church. For the first time in her life, she had a passport. She opened a dedicated savings account, depositing a portion of her tailoring income every week. The account wasn't for an emergency fund for Marcus. It was for a 2-week guided tour of London and Paris with the Bells, scheduled for the following spring. 6 months passed. Emma's life had settled into a beautiful golden rhythm. Then, on a crisp Tuesday morning in October, the phone rang. Emma was at her sewing machine, humming softly. She glanced at the caller ID. Marcus. She let it ring 3 times before picking it up, pressing the phone to her ear with her shoulder as she pinned a hem. "Hello, Marcus," she said calmly. Mom, oh God." Emma stopped pinning. The voice on the other end of the line was not the polished CFO. It was the frantic, hyperventilating sound of a man in absolute freefall. He was sobbing, a deep, guttural sound that instantly bypassed all of Emma's carefully constructed boundaries and struck the raw, primal nerve of her motherhood. "Marcus, baby, what is it? What's wrong?" she asked, her heart suddenly pounding against her ribs. It's Leo, Mom," Marcus choked out, his voice cracking. "He's been sick, really sick. We had to take him to the ER last week. He had this severe respiratory infection, and they had to keep him in the pediatric ICU for 4 days. Emma gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. "Oh, Lord Jesus, is my grandbaby okay? Why didn't you call me immediately?" "He's okay now, he's stable," Marcus rushed to say, sniffing loudly. "But Mom, the bills. The insurance company is claiming the specific ICU care was out of network. They're denying the claim. The hospital sent us a bill for $15,000, and they're threatening to send it to collections by Friday. It's going to ruin my credit, Mom. It's going to destroy everything I've built. Chloe is a wreck. I don't know what to do." Emma felt the blood drain from her face. $15,000. It was an astronomical sum. Marcus, what about your savings? You make a six-figure salary, Emma asked, her mind racing. We're house poor, Mom, you know that, he sobbed. The mortgage, the cars, the lifestyle Chloe demands. We live paycheck to paycheck. And Chloe's parents just tied up all their liquid assets in a new real estate venture. They can't help. You're the only one I have left. Please, Mom, I am begging you. I know I've been a terrible son. I know I messed up when you visited. But please don't let them do this to us. For Leo. He used the baby. He knew exactly what button to press. Emma looked across the room at her dresser, where her bank book sat. She had exactly $16,400 in her high-yield savings account. It was the money she had saved from Thomas's life insurance, combined with the funds for her London trip. It was her entire safety net. But this was her grandson's health. This was an emergency. All right, Emma breathed, her voice shaking. The mother in her, the martyr that had been dormant for months, rose to the surface. All right, Marcus, don't cry. I'll go to the bank this morning. I will wire it to your account. Thank you, Mom. Oh, God, thank you. I promise I'll pay you back. I love you so much, he wept. Emma hung up the phone. Her hands were trembling. She quickly changed out of her house clothes, put on a respectable dress and her church coat, grabbed her purse, and drove straight to the Bank of America downtown. The bank was crowded. Emma pulled a paper ticket from the dispenser, number 42, and sat down in the waiting area. Her chest felt tight. Goodbye, London. Goodbye, Paris. But she told herself it was fine. That's what mothers did. They sacrificed. While she waited, her phone buzzed in her purse. It was a text message from Clara, her best friend from the Silver Bells. Clara was a tech-savvy 70-year-old who loved internet gossip. Clara. Emma, honey, tell me you are not paying for this foolishness. Emma frowned, confused. She typed back. Paying for what? I'm at the bank right now. Her phone buzzed again immediately. Clara had sent a link to an Instagram video. Clara. Click this right now before you give that boy a single dime. With trembling fingers, Emma tapped the link. The screen transitioned to Instagram. It was a video posted on Eleanor's public profile, the one Clara followed just to roll her eyes at. The video started playing. It was a panoramic sweep of a breathtaking, impossibly luxurious infinity pool overlooking the sparkling turquoise waters of the Pacific Ocean. Waiters in white linen walked by carrying trays of tropical drinks. The camera flipped to selfie mode. There was Eleanor, wearing oversized designer sunglasses and a wide-brimmed straw hat, looking tanned and ecstatic. Next to her was Chloe, holding a perfectly healthy, giggling baby Leo, who was splashing his feet in the shallow end of the pool. Aloha from Maui, everybody, Eleanor sang into the camera, her voice shrill with excitement. We are having the absolute time of our lives at the Four Seasons. Chloe has been so stressed with the new baby, and we just needed a girl's getaway to heal and recharge. And the biggest, most massive shout-out to my incredible, generous son-in-law, Marcus, who surprised us with this fully paid, 2-week, $15,000 VIP luxury healing retreat. He said nothing is too expensive for the women in his life. We love you, Marcus. Chloe leaned into the frame, blowing a kiss. Thanks, babe. You're the best husband ever. The video looped, starting over again. Aloha from Maui. $15,000 VIP luxury healing retreat. Emma sat frozen in the hard plastic chair of the bank lobby. The sounds of the tellers calling numbers and the hum of the air conditioner faded into a dull, roaring white noise in her ears. She watched the video a second time, then a third. Leo wasn't sick. There was no pediatric ICU. There were no hospital bills. Marcus had lied. But this wasn't like the Thanksgiving lie, born of cowardice and embarrassment. This was predatory. Chloe had likely demanded her husband fund an extravagant vacation for her and her mother to decompress from the baby. Marcus, desperate to keep up the facade of wealth and terrified of his wife's displeasure, couldn't afford it. So he had turned to the one well he had been drinking from his entire life. He had manipulated his mother's love. He had weaponized his infant son's health. He had performed an Oscar-worthy breakdown on the phone, all to steal an old widow's retirement savings so his mother-in-law could sip margaritas in Hawaii. Ticket number 42, please, the bank teller called out. Number 42? Emma looked down at the ticket in her hand. Her knuckles were white. Slowly, deliberately, She tore the paper ticket in half. Then she tore it again. She dropped the pieces into the trash can beside her. She stood up and walked out of the bank. The cool autumn air hit her face, and with it came a clarity so sharp and absolute it felt like a religious awakening. The last lingering ghosts of her maternal guilt evaporated in the midday sun. She walked to her car, got into the driver's seat, and locked the doors. She pulled out her phone and didn't call Marcus. She opened FaceTime and hid his name. She wanted to see his face. He answered on the second ring. He was sitting in his home office in L.A., looking appropriately somber. He had even rubbed his eyes to make them look red. "Mom, are you at the bank? Did they process the wire?" he asked quickly, leaning into the camera. Emma didn't say a word. She took her iPad out of her purse, pulled up Clara's message, pressed play on the Instagram video, and held the iPad screen directly up to her phone's camera. Eleanor's shrill voice echoed through the car. "Aloha from Maui. $15,000 VIP luxury healing retreat. Thank you to my incredible son-in-law Marcus." Through her phone screen, Emma watched her son's face. She watched the exact moment his world collapsed. The fake sadness vanished, replaced by sheer, unadulterated terror. The blood drained from his cheeks until he looked like a ghost. His jaw dropped, and he started to stammer, a pathetic, high-pitched sound. Mom, listen, let me explain. Chloe was threatening to leave me if I didn't send them on this trip. She said I was a failure. I was desperate. I didn't know what else to do. I panicked. Please, Mom." Emma slowly lowered the iPad. She looked at the pathetic, hollow shell of a man on her screen. She felt no pity. She felt no anger. She felt nothing but a cold, final emancipation. "You told me my grandson was in intensive care," Emma said. Her voice was not loud, but it possessed a terrifying, quiet gravity. It was the voice of a judge delivering a life sentence. "You used my love for an innocent child to try and steal the money I saved to bury myself with. You did this so a woman who wouldn't let me sit on her furniture could go to a resort." "Mom, please, I'll fix it." "I gave you my youth, Marcus." Emma cut him off, her tone like a blade. "I gave you my back, my hands, my sweat, and my tears. I built a runway out of my own flesh so you could take off. But I am done. I am your mother. I am not your ATM. I am not your safety net. And I am no longer your fool." "Mom, wait. Do not ever ask me for a single dime again. If Chloe wants luxury, you tell her to go ask Eleanor." Emma tapped the red button, ending the call. Immediately, she went into her phone settings and blocked Marcus's number. She blocked his email. She blocked his wife, his mother-in-law, and anyone associated with them. She put the car in drive. She didn't drive home. Instead, Emma drove 3 miles down the road and pulled into the parking lot of a small, reputable law firm she knew from church. She walked into the lobby, her head held high, her spine straight. "Good afternoon," Emma said to the receptionist, offering a polite, radiant smile. "I need to see an estate planning attorney, please. It's time I update my will." The veneer of perfection is always the most expensive thing to maintain. For a while, Marcus managed to keep the illusion alive. He continued to wear his bespoke suits, lease his luxury vehicles, and fund a lifestyle that was bleeding him dry from the inside out. But the universe has a profound, undeniable memory. You cannot build a castle on the crushed bones of the people who loved you and expect the foundation to hold. For Marcus, the collapse did not begin with a dramatic explosion. It began with a polite, sterile calendar invite marked Urgent, Q3 Restructuring. It was a Tuesday morning, exactly 14 months after his mother, Scarlett, had looked him in the eye through a FaceTime screen and severed the cord. Marcus walked into the glass-walled conference room of his Los Angeles tech firm, expecting to discuss the quarterly projections. Instead, he found the CEO and the head of human resources waiting for him. They weren't smiling. "Marcus, have a seat," the CEO said, his voice carrying the detached, rehearsed cadence of an executioner. In less than 15 minutes, Marcus's entire identity was stripped away. The firm was facing a massive downturn. Investors were pulling out. His position as chief financial officer was deemed redundant in the new, streamlined corporate structure. Because his recent performance had been distracted and erratic, the weight of his mounting secret debts severely impacting his focus, his severance package was the absolute legal minimum. He was handed a cardboard box, asked to surrender his company laptop, and escorted out of the building by security before noon. Marcus walked out into the blinding California sun, carrying a box of useless desk trinkets. He stood by his leased Tesla, his hands shaking so violently he dropped his keys twice. He was 36 years old, unemployed, and drowning in an ocean of invisible debt. The $15,000 he had put on his high-interest credit card for Chloe and Eleanor's Maui healing retreat had ballooned into a monstrous sum. The mortgage on the Hollywood Hills glass fortress was an astronomical monthly figure that required both his base salary and his annual bonuses just to cover. He had no savings. He had no safety net. He drove home in a state of absolute terror. He rehearsed what he would say to Chloe. He envisioned a partnership, a moment where she would hold his hand, tell him they would scale back, that they would sell the expensive cars, downsize to a modest apartment, and weather the storm together. That was what marriage was supposed to be, wasn't it? That was what his mother and father had done when times were hard. When Marcus pushed open the heavy front door, the house smelled of expensive eucalyptus candles. Chloe was in the living room, unboxing a fresh delivery of designer baby clothes for Leo. She looked up, her brow furrowing in irritation as Marcus walked in. "You're home early," she said, not looking up from a tiny cashmere sweater. "I told you the interior decorator is coming at 2 to look at the nursery redesign. You need to be out of the way." Marcus set his cardboard box down on the pristine kitchen island. The sound was loud, hollow. "Chloe, sit down. We need to talk." Something in his tone made her stop. She looked at his pale face, then at the box. Her eyes narrowed. "What is that?" "I was let go," Marcus whispered, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. "The company is downsizing. I don't have a job." He waited for the gasp of sympathy. He waited for her to stand up and wrap her arms around him. Instead, the temperature in the room plummeted. Chloe's expression hardened, transforming instantly from a pampered wife into a cornered predator. "What do you mean you don't have a job?" "Marcus, the mortgage is due in 12 days. Leo's private preschool deposit is due next week. We have the country club gala on the 15th. "We have to cancel the gala," Marcus said, his voice rising in quiet desperation. "Chloe, you don't understand. We have 0 liquid cash. The credit cards are maxed out. We have to sell my car. We might have to list the house." Chloe stood up, her face flushed with a terrifying, absolute rage. "List the house? Are you out of your mind? My friends come to this house. My mother practically lives in this house. You promised me a standard of living, Marcus. You promised me I wouldn't have to struggle." "I did everything for you," Marcus finally yelled, the pressure of a year's worth of lies cracking his composure. "I ruined my relationship with my own mother to fund your lifestyle. I put $15,000 of debt on my back so you and Eleanor could drink cocktails in Maui while I worked 80-hour weeks. You have to compromise with me now." Chloe looked at him as if he were a disgusting insect she had found on her immaculate floor. There was no love in her eyes. There was not even pity. There was only the cold, calculating realization that the ATM was empty. "I didn't force you to lie to your mother, Marcus," she said, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "That was your choice. And I certainly didn't sign up to be married to a failure. Fix this. Ask your mother for the money. I don't care how you do it, but keep my lifestyle intact." She turned on her heel and walked out of the room, leaving him standing alone in the cavernous, echoing kitchen. 2 days later, desperation drove Marcus to commit his ultimate humiliation. With his mother's phone number permanently blocked and his emails bouncing back, he had only one place left to turn. He drove to Calabasas to visit his in-laws. Eleanor and her husband Richard received him in their sprawling, manicured garden. They sat on wrought iron patio furniture, sipping iced tea. Eleanor was wearing the very same designer sunglasses she had worn in the Hawaiian Instagram video, the video funded by Marcus's financial ruin. Marcus laid it all out. He swallowed his pride, explained the job loss, and begged for a bridge loan. Just $100,000 to keep the house out of foreclosure and pay off the aggressive credit card companies while he hunted for a new executive position. Eleanor stirred her iced tea, the ice cubes clinking musically against the glass. She looked at Marcus with the exact same condescending, superior smirk she had once directed at his mother. Karma had come full circle, and its poetry was brutal. "Marcus, dear," Eleanor sighed, adjusting her silk scarf. "We love you, of course, but Richard and I have a strict policy against mixing family and finances. It always ends in resentment, doesn't it?" "Eleanor, please," Marcus pleaded, his hands gripping his knees. "I paid for your vacation. I have always been generous with this family. I just need a lifeline." Richard, who had been silent, leaned forward. "You made a 6-figure salary, son. If you couldn't manage to put away a rainy day fund, that is a reflection of your own poor financial discipline. We are not a charity. Our priority is Chloe and our grandson. We will make sure they are taken care of. But you are a grown man. You need to pull yourself up by your bootstraps." They were casting him aside. The wealthy, glamorous family he had sold his soul to join was discarding him the moment his bank account ran dry. He was no longer a useful asset. He was a liability. The descent after that was rapid and merciless. Without an income, the facade completely shattered. The repo men came for his Tesla in the middle of the night, towing it away while the neighbors watched through their blinds. The credit card companies began calling every hour, their threats growing increasingly aggressive. Notice of default arrived in the mail regarding the mortgage. And then, the final blow. Marcus came home one Friday afternoon after another failed, humiliating job interview. He noticed immediately that the driveway was empty. He walked into the house, and the silence hit him like a physical wall. The expensive vases were gone. The designer rugs were rolled up and missing. He ran down the hallway to the nursery. The crib was empty. Leo's clothes, his toys, his blankets, all gone. On the kitchen island, sitting perfectly centered under the pendant lights, was a thick manila envelope. Marcus opened it with trembling fingers. It was a petition for divorce. Chloe had left him. She had taken their son, moved back into the luxurious safety of Eleanor's Calabasas mansion, and instructed her high-powered family lawyers to go after everything that was left. She wanted full custody. She wanted alimony. She was abandoning the sinking ship, completely indifferent to the fact that he was drowning. Marcus fell to his knees in the empty kitchen. The cold marble floor offered no comfort. He screamed until his vocal cords tore, a sound of absolute, shattering despair. He had sacrificed the only woman in the world who had ever truly loved him unconditionally, all to appease a woman who only loved what he could buy her. He was left with absolutely nothing. For 2 weeks, Marcus lived like a ghost in the foreclosed house. The electricity was shut off. He slept on a mattress on the floor, eating canned soup cold. His friends, the networking buddies, the golf partners, the country club elites, ghosted him the moment news of his ruin spread. His calls went to voicemail. His texts were left on read. In the dark, echoing silence of his failure, Marcus's mind began to twist. Desperation breeds a very specific kind of delusion. He lay awake in the dark, staring at the ceiling, and his thoughts drifted back to Atlanta. He thought of the smell of peach cobbler. He thought of the warm, heavy quilts. He thought of his mother. "Scarlet," his mind whispered. In his twisted, panicked logic, he began to convince himself that her anger was just a phase. She was his mother, after all. A mother's love is biological. It is an unshakable law of the universe. Yes, she had been furious about the Hawaiian vacation. Yes, she had blocked him. But that was over a year ago. Time heals all wounds. She was just trying to teach me a lesson, Marcus rationalized to himself, pacing the empty floor. She wanted me to realize what I was losing. Well, I've realized it. I've lost everything. If I show up, broken and humbled, she'll take me in. That's what moms do. They are the safe harbor. She'll let me stay in my old room. She'll cook for me. She'll help me get back on my feet. He clung to this fantasy like a drowning man to a piece of driftwood. It was the only thing keeping him from going entirely insane. Marcus packed whatever clothes he had left into a duffel bag. He took the last few $100s he had scraped together, rented a cheap, beaten-up economy car, and began the long drive across the country. He drove for 3 days, through the scorching deserts of Arizona, across the flat, endless plains of Texas, and deep into the humid, pine-scented air of the South. His body was exhausted, fueled only by cheap gas station coffee and sheer frantic hope. As he drove, he rehearsed his speech. He would cry. He would tell Scarlett that she had been right all along. He would tell her how evil Chloe and Eleanor were, painting himself as the victim of their manipulation. He would throw himself at her mercy. He pictured her opening the door, her eyes widening in shock, and then the inevitable softening of her face before she pulled him into a warm, forgiving embrace. It was near midnight on a Tuesday when he finally crossed the city limits of Atlanta. The familiar streets washed over him with a wave of intense, painful nostalgia. He navigated the quiet, tree-lined neighborhood by memory. He turned onto her street. His heart was hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He pulled the rented car up to the curb. The street was dark, quiet, asleep. But as he looked at the house, a subtle wave of confusion rippled through him. The house looked different. The old overgrown oak tree in the front yard had been beautifully pruned. The peeling paint on the porch had been scraped and replaced with a fresh, vibrant coat of slate gray. There were new, elegant flower boxes hanging from the windowsills, overflowing with bright marigolds. It didn't look like the tired, sad house of a lonely widow. It looked vibrant. It looked alive. Marcus dismissed the changes. She must have hired a landscaper, he thought. He grabbed his duffel bag from the passenger seat. His legs were stiff and trembling as he walked up the concrete path. The night air was thick with the sound of cicadas. He climbed the porch steps, the wood no longer creaking beneath his weight. He stood before the front door. He took a deep, shuddering breath, calling up the tears he needed, perfectly crafting his expression of total defeat. Marcus raised his fist and knocked firmly on the door. He waited, his heart in his throat, fully expecting his past to open the door and save him. Marcus stood on the porch, his fist raised, his knuckles hovering inches from the freshly painted wood of the front door. The Georgia night was thick and humid, alive with the deafening hum of cicadas, but all Marcus could hear was the frantic, erratic thumping of his own heart. He knocked, 3 sharp, desperate raps. He waited, holding his breath. The porch light flicked on, bathing him in a harsh yellow glow that illuminated his wrinkled clothes, his unkempt beard, and the dark, bruised exhaustion under his eyes. He heard the deadbolt slide back with a heavy metallic thud. The door opened. Marcus instantly launched into the performance he had rehearsed for 3 days across 3,000 miles of highway. He let his shoulders slump, his face contorting into a mask of absolute broken sorrow. Tears welled in his eyes, spilling over his cheeks. "Mom," he choked out, his voice cracking perfectly on the syllable. "Mom, I am so sorry. I lost everything. Chloe left me. She took Leo. They fired me. They took the house. You were right about them, Mom. You were right about everything. Please, please, I need you. I have nowhere else to go." He waited for the gasp. He waited for the maternal cry of anguish, for the warm, familiar arms to wrap around his neck and pull him into the sanctuary of the hallway. He closed his eyes, leaning forward slightly, anticipating the embrace. Nothing happened. Slowly, Marcus opened his eyes. Emma stood in the doorway. But it was not the Emma that Marcus remembered. It was not the tired, anxious, hovering martyr who used to wear frayed cardigans and smell of cooking grease. The woman standing before him looked 10 years younger. Her skin was glowing, deeply moisturized and radiant. Her hair, which used to be pulled back into a hasty, practical bun, was beautifully styled in soft, silver-streaked twists. She was wearing a luxurious emerald green silk robe over matching pajamas and a pair of plush velvet slippers. She looked rested. She looked wealthy. She looked like a queen standing at the threshold of her own castle. Emma did not reach out to touch him. She just looked at him, her dark eyes calm, analytical, and utterly devoid of pity. "Are you finished, Marcus?" she asked. Her voice was smooth and even, betraying not a single tremor of emotion. Marcus blinked, thrown entirely off balance. The script in his head evaporated. "Mom, did you hear me? I lost everything. I'm broke. Chloe took my son." "I heard you," Emma said mildly. She stepped back, opening the door wider. "It is 1 o'clock in the morning. Stop crying on my porch for the neighbors to hear. Come inside." Marcus picked up his duffel bag, a surge of desperate relief washing over him. "She's letting me in," he thought frantically. "She's playing tough, but she's letting me in. It's going to be okay." He stepped over the threshold, dropping his bag onto the hardwood floor with a heavy thud. He locked the door behind him and turned around, taking a deep breath of the air. He expected the familiar, comforting scent of bleach, old wood, and maybe some leftover soul food in the fridge. Instead, the house smelled of expensive lavender diffusers and fresh eucalyptus. The walls, once covered in faded floral wallpaper, were painted a crisp, modern cream. Elegant, abstract art hung where the cheap, framed Bible verses used to be. The worn-out recliner was gone, replaced by tasteful mid-century modern furniture. Marcus barely registered the changes. His exhausted mind was fixed on one thing: his childhood bedroom, the sanctuary, the room Emma had kept like a museum for him, with his basketball trophies, his old posters, and the heavy, comforting quilt on the bed. He just needed to lie down in that bed, close his eyes, and regress to a time when he was safe. Without asking, Marcus picked up his bag and walked past his mother, heading straight down the hallway toward the guest room. Emma didn't stop him. She simply folded her arms across her silk robe and watched him go. Marcus reached the familiar wooden door. He turned the brass knob and pushed it open, stepping inside, ready to collapse. He froze. The heavy duffel bag slipped from his fingers, hitting the floor. Marcus's mouth fell open, his eyes widening in absolute, uncomprehending shock. The room was gone. Not just redecorated. Gone. The wall separating his old bedroom from the small storage closet had been completely knocked down, doubling the size of the space. The carpet had been ripped up, replaced by gleaming polished hardwood. The walls were painted a brilliant, pristine white. Track lighting ran across the ceiling, illuminating an incredible professional workspace. Where his twin bed used to be, there was now a massive custom-built wooden cutting table. In the center of the room stood 3 velvet dressmakers' mannequins, one of them draped in a breathtaking half-finished wedding gown made of intricate French lace. 2 high-end industrial sewing machines sat near the window. The walls were lined with custom shelving, holding hundreds of spools of vibrant thread, bolts of expensive silk and satin, and framed sketches of dress designs. There was no basketball poster. There were no trophies. There was no bed. The shrine to Marcus Carter had been utterly, ruthlessly eradicated. What is this?" Marcus whispered, his voice trembling as he stepped backward out of the room. He looked at his mother, who had quietly followed him down the hall. "Where is my room? Where is my stuff?" "Your things are in a cardboard box in the furthest corner of the attic," Emma said calmly, leaning against the doorframe. "As for the room, it no longer exists. This is my atelier. My custom bridal business has taken off since I started advertising online. I needed the space." But this is my house," Marcus stammered, the delusion shattering into a million jagged pieces. "This is my room. You were supposed to keep it for me. You promised." "I promised you a room when you were a child," Emma corrected him, her voice firm. "You are a 36-year-old man. You abandoned this room a long time ago. Did you honestly expect me to keep 20 square feet of my own home frozen in time, gathering dust, just in case your terrible decisions finally caught up with you and you needed a place to hide?" "You erased me," Marcus choked out, genuine tears of panic finally spilling over his eyelashes. It was the deepest cut of all. He had always believed that no matter how terribly he treated her, he was the center of her universe. To see physical proof that she had moved on, that she had built a beautiful, thriving life in the empty space he left behind, broke him completely. "I didn't erase you, Marcus," Emma said, her eyes narrowing slightly. "You erased yourself. I merely swept up the mess you left behind and planted a garden over it. Now pick up your bag and come to the living room." Marcus obeyed like a beaten dog. He dragged his bag into the living room, his legs shaking so badly he could barely stand. He looked at the plush, comfortable armchair, hoping to sink into it. "No," Emma said sharply, pointing to the beige linen sofa against the wall. "Sit there." Marcus sat on the sofa. He buried his face in his hands, weeping openly. "Mom, please. Please help me. Chloe took Leo. I have no money. The credit card companies are calling me every hour. I'm ruined. I need a loan. I need a place to stay. Just let me stay here for a few months until I get back on my feet." Emma walked over and stood over him. She looked down at the man she had sacrificed her entire youth to build. For a fleeting fraction of a second, the ghost of the old Emma, the martyr, the protector, whispered in her ear, "He's your baby. Fix it for him." But the new Emma, the woman who knew her own worth, silenced the ghost effortlessly. "Look at me, Marcus," she commanded. Marcus slowly lifted his tear-streaked face. "When I flew across the country to see the grandson you hid from me," Emma began, her voice ringing with the absolute, terrifying authority of a matriarch, "your wife treated me like a stray dog. She made me wash your dishes, she forbade me from holding the baby, and she refused to give me a bed. Do you remember where you told your 62-year-old mother to sleep, Marcus?" Marcus squeezed his eyes shut, his chest heaving. "The couch," he sobbed. "The white leather couch. Mom, I'm sorry. I was weak. I was afraid of her." "Yes, you were. Emma agreed coldly. You put me on a freezing leather sectional because you were too much of a coward to demand respect for the woman who gave you life. But I am a better woman than you are a man. I will not put you on a freezing leather sectional. I will give you a pillow, and I will give you a heavy quilt. Marcus looked up, a spark of pathetic hope igniting in his eyes. You'll let me stay? You have exactly 7 days, Emma said. The words hit the air like the strike of a judge's gavel. 7 days? Marcus stammered, confused. Mom, I can't fix my life in a week. I need months. I need to hire a lawyer for custody. I need to— 7 days, Emma repeated, cutting him off effortlessly. On the morning of the 8th day, you will take your bag and you will walk out of my front door. I do not care if you go to a cheap motel, a homeless shelter, or a friend's couch. But you will not live here. You are an adult. You made your bed with Chloe and you funded it with lies. Now you must sleep in the ruins of it. Mom, you can't do this to me, Marcus yelled, panic turning into a brief, frantic flash of anger. I'm your son. You have money now. I can see it. Look at this house. You have a business. You can help me. I am helping you, Emma said, her expression entirely unbothered by his outburst. I am giving you a week of free room and board. As for my money, you lost the right to ask about my finances the day you tried to manipulate me out of $15,000 so your mother-in-law could drink margaritas in Maui. My money is mine. You will not see a single dime of it. Marcus stared at her, horrified. He was looking for the mother he could manipulate, the mother he could guilt-trip, but she was dead. In her place stood a fortress of a woman, completely impervious to his emotional blackmail. Tomorrow morning, Emma continued, you will go to the public library. You will update your resume. You will apply for jobs. Not CFO jobs. Any job. You will apply at the grocery store, the hardware store, or the gas station. You will secure an income, and you will secure a room to rent. Do you understand me? Marcus looked down at his hands, completely defeated. The fight drained out of him, leaving only the crushing reality of his consequences. Yes, ma'am, he whispered. Good. The spare blankets are in the hall closet. Turn the lights off when you go to sleep. Emma turned on her heel and walked to the master bedroom. She closed the door. The lock clicked, sharp and final in the quiet house. The next 6 days were a grueling, humiliating reality check for Marcus. Emma did not cook for him. She did not do his laundry. She did not ask him how his day went. She treated him like a tenant who was late on rent. While Marcus spent his days trudging to fast food restaurants and retail stores, begging managers for entry-level jobs because his corporate resume was overqualified, Emma worked in her sunlit studio, laughing on the phone with her clients and playing upbeat jazz music. By Thursday night, Marcus had managed to secure a job managing the night shift at a local logistics warehouse. He had also used the last of his cash to rent a tiny, depressing room in a boarding house near the highway. He was exhausted, broken, and terrified of the future. On Friday morning, Marcus woke up on the sofa at 7 a.m. He folded the quilt and sat on the edge of the cushions, staring blankly at the wall. Today was his last day. He heard the lock on the master bedroom click open. Emma walked into the living room, and Marcus felt the breath catch in his throat. She was not wearing her sewing clothes. She was dressed in a stunning, perfectly tailored camel-colored trench coat over a chic navy blue pantsuit. A silk scarf was tied elegantly around her neck. Her makeup was flawless. Trailing behind her, rolling smoothly on the hardwood floor, was a large, hard-shell suitcase. It was bright, brilliant, cherry red. Mom? Marcus stood up, bewildered. Where are you going? You're dressed up. I am going to the airport, Emma said, checking her gold wristwatch. My flight to Heathrow leaves at noon. Heathrow? Marcus repeated, his brain struggling to process the information. London? You're going to London? London for 5 days, then taking the train to Paris for another week. Emma smiled, a genuine, radiant expression that lit up her entire face. The Silver Bells Travel Club. Clara and the girls are picking me up in a taxi any minute now. Marcus stared at her suitcase. It was the physical manifestation of the money he had tried to steal. It was the retirement she had rescued from his greed. She was going to Europe. She was living the life she had deferred for 36 years to raise him. But, Mom, Marcus stammered, feeling incredibly small. I'm moving out today. I'm moving to a boarding house. I start my warehouse job on Monday. Don't you want to, I don't know, say goodbye? Help me move my bag?" Emma stopped and looked at him. There was no malice in her eyes, only a profound, peaceful detachment. "You only have one duffel bag, Marcus. You don't need help carrying it," she said softly. Outside, a taxi honked its horn twice. The sound of older women laughing and chattering drifted through the crisp morning air. Emma picked up her purse and gripped the handle of her red suitcase. She walked toward the front door. Before she opened it, she paused and looked back at her son. "Leave your house key on the kitchen counter," she instructed. "Make sure the door locks behind you." "Mom," Marcus pleaded one last time, tears springing to his eyes. "Do you even love me anymore?" Emma looked at him for a long, silent moment. She thought of the little boy who used to hold her hand in the grocery store. She thought of the teenager who promised to buy her a mansion one day. And she thought of the man who had traded her dignity to buy favor with strangers. "I love you, Marcus," Emma said, her voice gentle, yet holding the unbreakable strength of steel. "I will always love you, but I finally learned how to love myself more. Have a good life, son." She opened the door and stepped out into the brilliant morning sun. "Emma, girl, get in here. We're going to Miss Duty Free," Clara yelled from the back of the taxi, waving frantically. Emma laughed, a rich, joyous sound that echoed down the street. The driver loaded her red suitcase into the trunk. She climbed into the back seat, surrounded by her friends, surrounded by women who valued her, respected her, and loved her fiercely. As the taxi pulled away from the curb, heading toward the airport, Emma didn't look out the back window. She didn't look at the house, and she didn't look at the broken man standing in the doorway. She looked straight ahead, toward the horizon, where her real life was finally beginning.